I heard the pop before I felt the jolt. My front tire hissed like a snake as I pulled into my driveway. I stepped out of my truck, squinting at the asphalt. There they were, dozens of roofing nails scattered like confetti across the concrete, glinting in the late afternoon sun. This wasn't an accident. I'm Keaton Fuller. I've lived in the Timber Ridge community for 6 years, and I've butted heads with the HOA more times than I can count. The worst of them: Harriet Elwood, middle-aged, bleach-blonde bob, pastel cardigans, and the personality of a wasp nest. She's the president of the HOA and walks around like she owns every square foot of the neighborhood. Last week, she came storming up to me while I was pressure washing my driveway. "You know, Keaton, this kind of noise isn't allowed after 5, she barked, arms folded like she was waiting for applause. "It's 4:30, I replied without looking up. "Well, I'm just saying," she sniffed, eyeing my truck and tools like they were trash bags. "You're pushing the limits." Again. She's had it out for me ever since I refused to let the HOA dictate what color I could paint my mailbox. I kept it simple, classic black. Apparently that was an act of rebellion, so when I found the nails, I didn't wave it off as some random prank. I knew. This had Harriet's fingerprints all over it. I crouched down with my phone and started recording. I filmed every single nail, the tire damage, and the fact that there were no similar nails on the street or sidewalk, just my driveway. I even spotted a few in a neat little pile near the edge, like someone had dumped them from a bag and hadn't bothered to spread them out evenly. I walked straight to my garage, pulled up the security camera footage from earlier that day, and there it was. Clear as day. Harriet in her pink windbreaker walking up my driveway with a tote bag. She looked around, reached inside, and started tossing nails like she was feeding pigeons. Then she strutted off like nothing happened. My blood pressure spiked. I'd had enough. I dialed the non-emergency police line and reported the criminal Mischief. The dispatcher took it seriously when I mentioned I had video evidence of a known HOA official intentionally damaging private property. "Stay put," they said. "We're sending a unit." The cruiser rolled up 20 minutes later, lights off, but unmistakable in its presence. Officer Delgado stepped out, a lean man with a straight back and a face that didn't waste any motion. "You the one who called about the driveway sabotage?" he asked, eyeing the tire damage and the scattered nails. "That's me." "Keaton Fuller," I replied, gesturing toward the driveway. He crouched low, sweeping his flashlight over the nails. Then he stood, eyes narrowing slightly as I handed him my phone with the footage queued up. He watched in silence. When the clip ended, he let out a low breath through his teeth. "Well, that's about as clear as it gets." "You want to press charges?" She cost me a tire, and who knows what else she's tried that I haven't caught. "Yeah, I want her held accountable." He nodded, already pulling out a notepad. "I'll need a copy of that video, and I'll be back tomorrow with a formal property damage report." This counts as criminal mischief under state law, intentional sabotage of private property. And given who she is, there may be additional implications. Like what? She's an elected officer of your HOA, right? That makes this not just a crime, but a possible abuse of authority. If she's using her position to retaliate against residents, that could get ugly. Officer Delgado took photos, bagged a few of the nails, and left with a promise. "We'll be in touch. And if she tries anything else, document everything. Don't confront her directly." The next morning, I woke up to find a typed letter shoved under my front door. No envelope, no return address, just a single sheet of paper. "You're making a mistake. Some things are better left alone. Stay in line." There was no signature, but I didn't need a handwriting expert to guess who sent it. The phrasing alone was textbook Harriet, passive-aggressive, dipped in entitlement. I took a photo of the letter and emailed it to Officer Delgado. He responded within the hour. "Intimidation attempt. Keep it. We're adding it to the case file." By noon, word had started to spread. Not from me, no, I hadn't told a soul except the police. But someone was talking. My neighbor Maya, a nurse who worked nights and kept to herself, knocked on my door holding a mug of tea and looking uneasy. "I don't want to get involved in anything," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "But I saw Harriet walking around your driveway yesterday morning with something in her hands." I didn't think anything of it until I heard what happened. "You willing to give a statement?" She hesitated, then nodded. "If it helps stop this kind of thing, yeah." That evening, Officer Delgado returned with a second officer and a clipboard of paperwork. "We're moving forward with a misdemeanor charge, criminal mischief in the 3rd degree," he explained. Given the video, the intimidation note, and now a witness statement, the prosecutor's office has enough to begin proceedings. I watched from my window the next afternoon as 2 uniformed officers walked right up to Harriet's door and knocked with the kind of authority that didn't need to shout. She opened, visibly startled, and they spoke to her for several minutes. Then she was escorted to the back of the cruiser, not cuffed, but clearly not in control. It was subtle but unmistakable. The HOA queen bee being taken in for questioning. I didn't cheer. I didn't wave. I just stood there, arms crossed, letting it sink in. The Timber Ridge community buzzed for days. Rumors swirled like leaves in a windstorm. Most people didn't know the full details, but that didn't stop them from speculating. At the next HOA meeting, an emergency session called by the board, Harriet was noticeably absent. In her place sat a pale-faced vice president named Craig, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "As acting president," he began, voice shaking slightly, "I want to formally acknowledge the incident involving Mrs. Elwood. Until the legal matters are resolved, she's been placed on administrative leave." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Craig cleared his throat. "In the meantime, we'll be reviewing our code of conduct and the extent of authority granted to board members. We're also implementing a transparency policy effective immediately. All board communications and decisions will be documented and made available to residents within 72 hours. I raised my hand. "Will there be an independent oversight committee?" Craig blinked. "That's under consideration." "It shouldn't be. You've let Harriet run unchecked for years. If residents hadn't taken action, she'd still be out there dropping nails on driveways." He nodded slowly. "Point taken." After the meeting, I walked out into the parking lot with Maya beside me. "You sure know how to shake things up," she said, not trying to, just tired of being stepped on. "Well, people are watching now. You've got more support than you think." The next week brought more revelations. An anonymous tipster, likely another board member finally growing a conscience, leaked emails between Harriet and a few select residents. The messages revealed a disturbing pattern. She'd been targeting homeowners she didn't personally like, fabricating violations and fining them into submission. One exchange even suggested she encouraged a neighbor to report my truck as an eyesore, despite it being legally parked and well-maintained. I compiled the emails, statements, and footage into a neat timeline and sent it to the county's Office of Neighborhood Governance. 2 weeks later, I got a reply. "Thank you for your submission. We are opening a formal investigation into the Timber Ridge HOA's board practices, citing potential abuse of authority, selective enforcement, and procedural violations." I printed that email and pinned it to my fridge. It didn't stop there. A retired attorney down the street, Mr. Langston, approached me with a folder. "I've been documenting HOA missteps for 3 years, he said. "I never had enough on my own to act, but now with your case, we might have a real shot at forcing a restructure." Together, we organized a petition to hold a full board recall vote. We needed signatures from 1/3 of homeowners to initiate it. By the end of the second week, we had nearly half. One evening, I came home to find my driveway completely clean, not just free of nails, but spotless. Someone had power washed it, even resealed the edges. No note, no explanation, a silent concession from someone who knew the tide had turned. When the recall vote happened, it wasn't even close. Harriet was officially removed along with 2 of her cronies. Craig resigned the next day. A new board was elected within a week, comprised of people who'd never even considered running before but were fed up enough to act. I didn't take a seat. I didn't need to. I'd done what I came to do: shine a light on the rot and give the neighborhood a reason to stand up. Harriet's court case is still pending. She's facing fines, community service, and possibly more if the intimidation letter is included in the sentencing. Her lawyer is already floating a plea deal. As for me, I replaced the tire, upgraded my security system, and started parking with the camera facing the street. And every time I see a neighbor wave now, there's something different behind it, something solid. Respect, gratitude, maybe even a little inspiration. Because the thing about bullies, no matter what title they hide behind, is they count on silence. And sometimes, all it takes is one nail too many. 3 weeks after the recall, Timber Ridge felt different, like someone had opened a window in a stuffy room. The tension that used to hover over block meetings and backyard barbecues had lifted. For the first time in years, people lingered on sidewalks, chatting like neighbors instead of inmates. I kept out of the spotlight, but the ripple effects of Harriet's fall were still hitting the shore. On a Tuesday morning, I got a call from Officer Delgado. His tone was clipped but focused. "We need to talk in person. Something came up in the investigation." 30 minutes later, we were sitting in his precinct office. He slid a thin manila folder across the desk. "Your case opened more than we expected. During the search of Elwood's home, we found HOA records that weren't supposed to exist. Private files, handwritten notes, financial documents that never appeared in any official minutes." I flipped open the folder. The first page was a spreadsheet: names, addresses, and numbers, but it wasn't a resident ledger. Each entry had a column labeled pressure point. Some listed mortgage statuses, others had court dates and overdue bills. A few had cryptic notes like divorce leverage or code violation threaten fine. I looked up. Where the hell did she get this? Good question. We're working on that. But here's the kicker: some of the financial data is protected under federal privacy laws. If she accessed it through unofficial means, she's looking at more than mischief. That's wire fraud, possibly conspiracy to commit extortion. I leaned back, stunned. She was blackmailing people, not directly, but the pattern's clear. Residents with vulnerabilities suddenly got hit with repeat violations. Fines escalated, threats of liens. Then magically some of them paid settlement fees in cash, no trace in the HOA's bank statements. Delgado turned a page to a list of flagged transactions. There's a slush fund, hidden. Looks like she was collecting off the books payments and laundering them through a landscaping contractor. We've already brought the guy in. He's flipping. Fast. I stared at the names on the ledger. 2 of them were single moms down the block. One was an elderly man with a walker who'd stopped coming to meetings after last year's lien scare. "She went after good people," I said. "She went after vulnerable people," Delgado corrected. "And she used her title to do it. That's why the state prosecutor's stepping in. The county's filing charges beyond the local level." By Friday, it was on the news. Not front-page headline style, but enough to make the evening segment. Local HOA president under investigation for financial misconduct. They blurred Harriet's face, but anyone in Timber Ridge knew exactly who it was. That same night, I got an unexpected knock. When I opened the door, a woman stood there holding a worn leather portfolio. Shoulder-length auburn hair, glasses perched low, and a tight expression like she was deciding whether to speak or leave. "I'm Dana. I used to be on the Timber Ridge board, years ago, before Harriet took over." I stepped aside. "You want to come in?" She nodded and followed me to the kitchen. As I poured her coffee, she opened the portfolio and pulled out a stack of old meeting notes, typed and annotated in pen. These are from the year before Harriet became president. Back then, the board operated normally. We had votes, open discussions, actual transparency. But when she ran, she brought in a few allies, quiet ones. They passed a bylaw amendment that centralized authority into a presidential executive role. It was buried in legalese. No one caught it. Dana flipped to a page with highlighted text. This clause let her override decisions if she declared emergency circumstances requiring unilateral action. She used that phrase to do whatever she wanted: hire vendors without bids, fine people without full board approval, even suspend voting rights of residents she claimed were non-compliant. Why didn't anyone fight back? People tried. But she was strategic. Anyone who pushed got targeted. I had a neighbor, Rob. He challenged her over a budget discrepancy. Next week, he got 3 violation notices for things like improper trash bin placement and unapproved fencing. He moved out 2 months later. I scanned the documents. They were thorough: dates, signatures, even typed memos she'd forwarded to board members. Dana tapped one memo. This one's key. It's a directive she sent to the treasurer in early spring. She requested the creation of a discretionary enforcement fund and said it would be off the books to avoid unnecessary scrutiny. The treasurer refused. He resigned 2 days later. I looked at her. Why bring this to me? You already cracked open the door. People are listening to you. I think you can finish what we started. The next morning, I called Mr. Langston. We met in his garage, which looked more like a law office than a place for tools. I laid out Dana's documents. His eyes lit up. This is more than misconduct. This is structural fraud. If we can prove that bylaw amendment was passed under false pretenses, we can petition to nullify every decision made under it. Meaning we could unwind every fine, every lien, every contract she signed solo. We could force restitution. And we might be able to file a class action on behalf of every resident affected. By the following week, Langston had assembled a team: 2 other retired attorneys, one of whom used to specialize in HOA law. We filed a formal motion with the county court to invalidate the executive clause and freeze HOA discretionary funds until a full audit could be completed. The court granted a temporary injunction. That same day, residents began receiving letters from a court-appointed financial examiner requesting interviews. Maya, the nurse down the street, told me she broke down crying when she read hers. All those late fees I paid. Maybe I'll finally get them back. 2 days later, Harriet's attorney tried to file a motion to suppress the ledger found in her home, calling it private documentation irrelevant to HOA operations. The judge denied it. The evidence stood. Then came the contractor's full deposition. He admitted that he deposited cash payments into a secondary account under his company's name, then funneled a portion to an account Harriet controlled under a shell nonprofit she'd created 5 years ago, supposedly for community beautification projects. The nonprofit had never completed a single project. But it had over $20,000 in undocumented deposits. The judge ordered a forensic audit. By now, Harriet's charges had grown from misdemeanor mischief to use of false pretenses to obtain money, unlawful access to protected financial information, criminal conspiracy, wire, fraud, obstruction of justice. Each count carried potential jail time. The state prosecutor gave her a choice: full cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence, or go to trial and risk the full weight of the evidence. She agreed to cooperate. At the next emergency court hearing, she entered a guilty plea on multiple charges, and her voice cracked when the judge read the sentencing terms: allowed 18 months probation, 6 months under house arrest, and mandatory restitution payments to residents affected by her off-the-books fines. But more than that, she was banned from serving on any HOA nonprofit board or community council for life. Harriet Elwood, once the self-declared queen of Timber Ridge, was now legally barred from holding authority over so much as a lemonade stand. The court ordered a full restitution fund overseen by a third-party fiduciary. Within 2 months, over 70 residents received checks ranging from $300 to nearly $2,000, reimbursing years of illegal fines and fees. The HOA bylaws were rewritten from scratch this time in plain language with a new rule. No single board member could ever hold executive power without a majority vote. Dana was elected president by unanimous vote. Langston became legal advisor, and I stayed off the board. But I was asked to serve on the Oversight Committee, a rotating group of residents who reviewed every board decision and published monthly reports. I agreed. Because the thing about power is, it's not always taken with a bang. Sometimes it creeps in slowly, hidden in bureaucracy and fine print. But once exposed, it loses its grip fast like mold in sunlight. And when a neighborhood learns to stand together, not even the most relentless Karen can hold them hostage. The new Timber Ridge Board held its first public accountability forum on a rainy Thursday evening in the community center. The folding chairs were packed, voices low, and umbrellas lined up like soldiers at the door. It wasn't about celebration. It was about reckoning. I sat near the back, arms folded, eyes scanning the crowd. People I'd passed for years without more than a nod were now nodding at me first, giving those brief, wordless acknowledgments that meant more than small talk ever could. Respect earned quietly. Dana stood at the podium, the old bylaws piled beside her like a stack of bad decisions. She tapped the microphone once and began. "We're not here to rehash what's already happened," she said. "We're here to explain what will never happen again." She outlined the new safeguards. External audits every 6 months, recorded meetings posted online within 72 hours, and a rotating financial review panel composed of volunteers from each street. No one would ever again hold unchecked access to fines, fees, or personal data. Afterward, as people mingled over coffee and brownies someone's grandmother had brought in a Tupperware bin, I found myself face to face with someone I hadn't expected to see again. Officer Delgado. "You've had quite a few neighborhood changes since we first spoke," he said. "Yeah, some a little overdue." He handed me a narrow envelope. "This came through the DA's office, thought you'd want to see it in person." I opened it. Inside was a one-page letter on official stationery, signed by the assistant district attorney handling Harriet's case. It confirmed the final outcome of the restitution case. The HOA would be required to pay damages to 12 additional residents following a supplemental audit. Harriet herself was found liable for a portion of those funds, to be garnished from a trust she'd quietly been drawing from. That trust, Delgado said, was originally set up as a charitable fund back in her husband's name. She diverted it 2 years ago, probably figured no one would notice. But her cooperation agreement required full financial disclosure. She didn't expect us to trace it that far. She ever say why she did it? She said something about the board being ungrateful, about people not respecting authority anymore. But we both know it wasn't about respect. He left after that, nodding once, and disappeared into the misty parking lot. I stayed behind, cleaning up folding chairs with Maya and a few others. Langston was organizing the financial records into a locked cabinet as if they were gold bars. There was a new rhythm to things, quieter but deliberate. A week later, a county inspector showed up. Not to investigate, but to observe. Turns out, Timber Ridge had been flagged by the State Housing Commission as a model case of neighborhood reform. They were drafting a policy brief, using our situation as the foundation for legislation addressing HOA oversight across the state. It was Langston who pushed that forward. He took the case brief and turned it into a white paper, citing every point of failure, every abuse of power, and the community's response. He submitted it to a state assemblywoman's office. Within a month, we were invited to testify before a housing committee in the Capitol. I didn't go. I sent Maya. She stood in front of a panel of lawmakers and told them how she used to park her car 2 blocks away just to avoid a citation for overnight shift parking. How she'd paid fines that never showed up in the HOA ledger, and how she'd finally felt safe enough to speak after someone else proved Harriet wasn't untouchable. They listened. The bill passed in preliminary review, the Homeowners Transparency and Accountability Act. Among its provisions were mandatory third-party audits for all HOAs over 50 homes, a resident ombudsman with the power to review board decisions, and criminal penalties for misuse of HOA authority. Back in Timber Ridge, We were just trying to get the weeds trimmed and the sidewalks patched. But somewhere far beyond our cul-de-sacs, the dominoes kept falling. There was one last ripple to come. Craig, the former vice president who replaced Harriet briefly before resigning, reappeared at a board meeting. He stood during open session and requested to speak. Dana nodded. "I want to apologize," he said. "I knew things weren't right. I didn't know how bad, but I knew. I looked the other way because it was easier. I just wanted to keep the peace. That was a mistake." Dana didn't reply immediately. She let the silence settle. "You're not the only one who stayed quiet," she finally said. "But silence is a choice. The good news is you're not quiet now." He nodded and sat down. Later that week, he joined the volunteer landscaping team and started trimming hedges with Langston. Meyer and I were walking the block one evening, watching the sun turn the rooftops gold when she asked, "Do you think it's over?" "Not over," I said. "Just ours now." The last thing Harriet left behind was her mailbox. It had been painted a garish shade of coral, trimmed with gold lettering. No one had touched it since she left. One morning, I found it repainted, matte gray with a modest bronze number plate. A small note was taped to the post, "Donated to the community. Use as you see fit." We turned it into a little free library. Langston stocked it with legal guides and old paperbacks. Someone added a notebook inside where residents could leave anonymous notes, suggestions, compliments, or concerns. Dana read them each week and brought the highlights to meetings. The HOA board had gone from feared enforcers to public servants, not perfect, but visible, accountable, and the nails, I still keep one in my garage, not as a trophy, just a reminder. It sits in a shadow box on a shelf beside my tire patch kit. A relic from a time when power came dressed as rules and control wore a cardigan. Now, when someone new moves into Timber Ridge, they usually hear the story within a week, not from me. From folks like Maya, or Mr. Langston. Or the kid who delivers pizza and once got fined for using the front gate too late at night. They all tell it a little differently. But the ending's always the same. One person stood up, then another, and the nails stopped falling.